Keanu Reeves walked into a fancy restaurant in the heart of the city. He wasn't dressed like the people you'd expect to see there. Instead of wearing a suit or expensive clothes, he wore wrinkled jeans, a simple shirt, and a comfortable jacket. It looked like he'd just come from a regular day. The restaurant sparkled with golden lights from crystal chandeliers, making everything look luxurious and grand. Keanu chose a quiet table in the corner, trying not to draw any attention to himself. Before he could even decide what to order, a waitress walked over to him. Her name was Alyssa. She had an annoyed look on her face as she glanced at him from head to toe. Her voice was sharp and rude when she spoke. "Are you sure you can afford to eat here?" she said with a smirk. Her words were loud enough that some of the other customers turned to look. What happened next shocked everyone in the restaurant. It wasn't just surprising, it taught everyone an important lesson. The restaurant, called Lumiere, was one of the fanciest places in Beverly Hills. It wasn't just a place to eat, it was a place to be seen. It was on a famous street with bright neon signs and expensive sports cars rolling by. Inside, everything was designed to impress. The floors sparkled, the tables were perfectly set, and even the music playing in the background sounded expensive. It was a place where rich and famous people came to enjoy themselves and show off. Alyssa was one of the restaurant's most experienced waitresses. She was proud of her job at Lumiere. She wore a perfectly tailored uniform, and her hair was always tied up neatly. She loved telling people she worked there as it made her feel important. But Alyssa had a flaw: she was quick to judge people. She decided if someone belonged there just by looking at them. If a customer didn't seem rich or important, Alyssa made sure they knew they weren't welcome. When the restaurant door opened and Keanu walked in, Alyssa immediately noticed him. She was standing at the reception desk, helping with a reservation for a VIP customer. She stopped mid-conversation and turned to look at him. He didn't look like the kind of person who usually walked into Lumiere. His clothes were simple and a little wrinkled, and his boots were scuffed. Alyssa tilted her head and stared at him with a raised eyebrow, thinking, "What is he doing here?" "Good evening," she said, her voice flat and forced. She gave him a smile that disappeared just as quickly as it came. "How can I help you?" Keanu smiled politely. "I'd like a table, please," he said, his tone calm and kind. Alyssa raised an eyebrow, looking at him like he had just asked for something ridiculous. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is a very exclusive restaurant." Keanu didn't seem bothered. He kept smiling and replied, "Yes, this is the place." Alyssa let out a small, fake laugh. She shook her head, acting like he didn't understand how things worked there. "All right, just a moment. I need to check something," she said, turning away without waiting for a response. She walked to the computer at the reception desk and typed his name into the reservation system. She made a big show of it, typing loudly and rolling her eyes. When nothing came up, she let out an annoyed sigh and walked back to Keanu. "Well, as I thought, you don't have a reservation," she said, her voice loud and sarcastic. "We do have a few tables available, but just so you know, this isn't a casual dining spot." Keanu remained calm. "I'd like to dine here," he said simply. Alyssa sighed dramatically, grabbed a menu and said, "All right. Follow me." She didn't even glance back as she led him through the restaurant. Instead of taking him to one of the nice tables in the middle of the room, where golden lights made everything look magical, she took him to the worst table in the restaurant. It was in a dark corner near the kitchen. The sound of dishes clanging and the chatter of the staff made it noisy and far from the peaceful atmosphere in the rest of the dining room. "Here you go," Alyssa said, dropping the menu on the table without care. "This table should work for you. It's private. I think you'll be comfortable here." Keanu looked at the table, then back at Alyssa. His kind smile didn't fade. "Thank you," he said calmly. Alyssa crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes, trying to figure out if he was being sarcastic or if he really didn't understand how badly she was treating him. "You're welcome," she said in a fake sweet voice. "Just so you know, we usually save this table for special cases, but since it's open, you can have it." Then she spun around and walked away before he could say another word. Alyssa kept an eye on Keanu from across the room. She expected him to get up and leave as soon as he opened the menu. She even whispered to a coworker, "He won't last 5 minutes here." When she returned to take his order, she was even meaner. She pulled out her notepad with a dramatic motion, making it clear she didn't want to be there. "Have you decided what you want?" she asked in a bored voice. "Or do you need me to help you pick something?" Keanu looked at the menu calmly. Then he pointed to one of the most expensive dishes. "I'd like to try this one," he said, his voice as steady as ever. Alyssa's eyes widened for a moment. She quickly stifled a laugh, covering her mouth with her hand. She couldn't believe he had chosen such an expensive dish. "Oh, of course," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The filet de Rossini?" She jotted it down with exaggerated movements, smirking as she wrote. She walked away muttering to herself, "Let's see how he handles the bill." Keanu, however, didn't seem bothered by any of it. He sat at the table looking relaxed and content. He scanned the room with calm eyes, as if he was enjoying the experience despite the way Alyssa was treating him. Across the dining room, Alyssa couldn't stop watching him. She was sure he was out of place and wouldn't last much longer. Little did she know, the truth about who he was would soon change everything. Keanu, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, wasn't just another customer. He was a man who had built a reputation for kindness and humility, someone who didn't care about showing off his wealth. And in this moment he was about to teach everyone in the restaurant, especially Alyssa, a lesson they wouldn't forget. She spoke in a bossy voice, "This is a very fancy dish. Just to make sure, sir, you know it costs $350, right?" Keanu nodded. His face stayed calm and steady. "Yes, it sounds great," he said. She tilted her head, and a mean smile spread across her face. "All right then," she said. "Just so there's no confusion later, maybe you should double-check the prices. We wouldn't want any surprises." Keanu stayed calm, and this seemed to annoy her even more. "I'm sure," he said softly. Alyssa sighed loudly like she was doing him a huge favor, and then wrote down the order. "Fine, as you wish," she said. "But I'll warn you, our chef thinks dishes like this are best for people who truly understand fine dining. I hope it's what you're expecting." She spun around to leave, but then stopped and looked back at him. "Oh, and one more thing," she added. "The tip here has to be at least 20%. Keep that in mind while you enjoy your meal." Keanu sat at his table, waiting quietly. He didn't seem upset at all. Instead, he looked around the fancy dining room. He noticed the elegant decorations and listened to the music coming from the piano player in the corner. When the appetizer arrived, Alyssa didn't place it gently on the table. Instead, she slammed it down so hard that the plate slid a little. "Here's your appetizer," she said, smirking. "I hope you like it, or at least know what it is." Keanu looked up at her and smiled politely. "Thank you," he said. Alyssa leaned in closer, her smirk growing wider. "You know," she said, "a lot of people don't like this dish. It's not something most people eat. But I think you'll manage. Good luck." Keanu looked at her with his same calm face. "It looks great. Thank you for being so thoughtful," he replied. Alyssa seemed annoyed that Keanu didn't react the way she wanted. She stormed off, muttering to one of her co-workers, "That guy won't even make it to the main course. Just wait until he sees the bill. He'll probably ask for the check right away." Keanu kept eating his appetizer peacefully. He didn't seem to notice the looks Alyssa was giving him from across the room. She whispered to another worker nearby, "I bet he's going to ask for tap water next. They always do." The co-worker didn't respond. He looked uncomfortable but didn't want to argue with Alyssa. An older man, sitting at a nearby table, had been quietly watching everything. He had white hair neatly combed back and was dressed in a fancy navy blue suit. He picked up his wine glass and gave Keanu a small toast from across the room. Keanu smiled politely and gave the man a little nod in return. Dinner was only just beginning, but it was clear that Alyssa's bad behavior wasn't going to stay unnoticed for long. After taking Keanu's order, Alyssa decided to make him wait on purpose. Instead of giving the order to the kitchen, she stopped to chat with other guests. She laughed loudly at a joke someone told at another table. Then she delivered drinks to a group she wasn't even assigned to serve. All the while, Keanu waited patiently. Alyssa kept walking past Keanu's table, pretending to be busy. Whenever Keanu looked in her direction, she quickly turned away and walked faster, acting like she had too much work to do. After a long wait, the older man in the navy suit decided to step in. He walked over to Keanu's table with a kind smile. "Good evening, young man," the man said warmly. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by, but I've noticed you've been waiting quite a while." Keanu looked up at the man and smiled gently. "Good evening. Don't worry about me. Everything is fine," he said calmly. The older man chuckled softly and leaned in a little. "You know," he said, "when people treat us badly, it's like a test. But staying calm is a great sign of strength. I can tell you have that strength." Before Keanu could respond, Alyssa suddenly appeared at the table. She looked at the older man and said in a polished but bossy tone, "Sir, can I help you with something? I wouldn't want you bothering our customer." The older man narrowed his eyes at Alyssa, but his voice stayed kind. "Don't worry," he said. "I was just greeting this gentleman. It's not often you meet someone so peaceful." Alyssa sighed loudly and motioned toward the man's table. Maybe you should go back to your seat and enjoy your dinner, she said impatiently. The older man nodded and turned back to Keanu. It was nice talking to you, he said kindly. Thank you for stopping by, Keanu replied with a small nod. The older man returned to his table but not before giving Alyssa a sharp, disapproving look. She acted like she didn't notice. Finally, Alyssa decided to bring Keanu's main course, but she took her time on purpose. First, she went to the kitchen and chatted with the chefs. She left Keanu's food sitting under a warming light while she laughed and joked. Then, she went back to the dining room and served other tables before bringing Keanu's dish. When she finally placed it on his table, she did so carelessly, almost shoving the plate in front of him. Here's your order, she said with a sarcastic tone. I hope you enjoy it, or if it's too much we can always get you something cheaper. Keanu stayed calm and looked at the plate. It looks wonderful. Thank you, he said politely. Alyssa smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It was a mean one. She leaned closer to Keanu and said in a quiet, teasing voice, Are you sure? It's a very fancy dish. It might be too much for someone like you. Keanu didn't lose his cool. He just smiled back. I'm sure, he said softly. Thank you for your concern. Alyssa stomped off to the bar where she muttered loudly to another coworker. He's pretending to be polite, but he's definitely uncomfortable, she said with a laugh. I bet he doesn't even know what he's eating. Her coworker looked uneasy. Maybe he just wants to have dinner, Alyssa, he said quietly. Alyssa scoffed. Did you see his boots? He doesn't belong here. Nearby, a couple who had been watching the whole time whispered to each other. She's awful, the woman said, shaking her head. He's being so polite and she keeps trying to embarrass him. The man frowned. It's terrible. We should talk to the manager, he said firmly. Keanu finished his main course calmly. He didn't seem upset by Alyssa's behavior. Some of the other guests gave him sympathetic looks, but Keanu just smiled slightly. When Alyssa came to clear his plate, she forced a fake smile and said, So, how was the dish? Did it meet your expectations? It was excellent, Keanu replied. Please tell the chefs they did an amazing job. Alyssa raised her eyebrows in surprise. She couldn't believe he wasn't upset. As she walked away, she muttered to herself, but loud enough for Keanu to hear. He might be smiling now, but let's see if he's still smiling when he gets the bill. Keanu stayed calm. He had a small smile on his face as if he was waiting for the perfect moment to respond. Alyssa wasn't done yet. She decided to make things worse. After serving him coffee, she spoke loudly enough for other tables to hear. It's so hard to keep high standards when just anyone can walk in, she said, glancing at Keanu. Her coworker looked uncomfortable and tried to change the subject. But Alyssa kept going. That's why we have a reservation policy. It's to stop situations like this, she added. Some of the nearby guests started to pay attention. They frowned or whispered to each other. This is so rude, the woman from the couple said quietly. The older man with the navy suit shook his head from his table. This has gone too far, he muttered under his breath. But Keanu stayed calm as if none of it bothered him. His peaceful expression seemed to irritate Alyssa even more. Alyssa felt more nervous than ever. She could feel the eyes of other people in the restaurant watching her. A fancy-looking woman sitting 2 tables ahead whispered to the man she was with, He must be someone important to stay this calm. Anyone else would have walked out by now. The man glanced toward Keanu and replied, Or maybe he's just stronger than she thinks. Alyssa didn't like how the attention was shifting. She decided to do something about it. With her best fake smile, she walked back to Keanu's table. Instead of being polite, she said, I hope you're enjoying your experience here, her tone dripping with sarcasm. It's always interesting to have different kinds of people here. It really adds a unique touch to the atmosphere. Keanu looked up at her. His expression was calm, but there was something serious in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was steady and firm. Different? Could you explain what you mean by that? Alyssa forced a short, nervous laugh. Oh, don't take it the wrong way, she said, trying to stay confident. I just mean, well, our usual customers are more traditional. It's not every day we see someone with your, style. The room went completely silent. Conversation stopped as nearby diners began to tune in to what was happening. Alyssa, however, smiled as if she was winning some kind of game. She didn't realize that things were about to change. Keanu said nothing for a few moments, simply holding her gaze. Finally he spoke, his tone calm but firm. You're right. Maybe I should handle this differently. Before Alyssa could reply, someone else stepped in. The restaurant manager, A man who looked very professional with his sharp suit and confident posture had entered the room. He scanned the area, quickly sensing the tension in the air. His eyes landed on Keanu, and his expression shifted immediately. The manager's face lit up with recognition and respect as he hurried over to the table, completely ignoring Alyssa. "Mr. Reeves," the manager said, his voice filled with admiration. "I had no idea you were visiting us tonight. Please, let me know how I can assist you or make your evening more enjoyable." Alyssa froze where she stood. Her face turned pale as she glanced between the manager and Keanu. She looked completely confused, her mind racing to figure out what was going on. Keanu gave the manager a small, polite smile. "Thank you," he said, "but there's no need to worry. I'm fine. I would just like to have a quick conversation with your staff, if that's okay." The manager's face became serious. He sensed something was wrong. "Of course, Mr. Reeves," he said quickly. Then he turned to Alyssa. His tone became sharp and his eyes narrowed. "Alyssa," he said sternly, "what were you thinking? Did you truly believe that one of the owners of this restaurant didn't deserve the same respect as everyone else?" Alyssa stammered, her voice shaky. I didn't know. He didn't say who he was and I just thought." Her words trailed off as she realized that nothing she said would fix the situation. Keanu finally broke the silence. His voice remained calm, but it carried a weight that made everyone listen. "I shouldn't have to tell you who I am to be treated with respect," he said. "Everyone who comes through these doors, no matter what they look like or how they dress, deserves kindness and dignity." The entire dining room was riveted. People who had been trying to act like they weren't listening were now fully focused on what was happening. A man sitting at a nearby table leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I knew there was something special about him. He has this presence you can't ignore." His wife nodded, watching Keanu with admiration. "And look how he's handling it," she said. "So calm, so graceful. I hope that woman learns something from this." Other diners whispered among themselves, some looking guilty for not stepping in earlier. There was a mix of shame and respect in the air as everyone waited to see what would happen next. The manager turned back to Alyssa, his face a mix of frustration and disappointment. "Alyssa," he said firmly, "we'll discuss this further after your shift. For now, stay away from this table. I will take over from here." Alyssa opened her mouth to protest, but the manager's piercing gaze stopped her. Without another word, she turned and walked away quickly, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. Keanu stood up from his seat and looked around. Every single person in the restaurant was watching him. In a calm but serious voice, he began to speak. "This restaurant was created to be a place where everyone feels welcome," he said. "It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or how you look. Everyone deserves respect and kindness." Unfortunately, that didn't happen tonight. The room was silent except for the sound of murmurs from a few tables. People were nodding in agreement, their faces showing that Keanu's words had left an impact. "I hope we can all take this as a reminder," Keanu continued, his voice steady. "Judging someone by how they look or assuming they don't belong is not just wrong, it goes against what this place stands for." The room remained quiet for a moment after he finished speaking. Then, slowly, some of the diners began to clap. It started with a few people and quickly spread across the room. The applause was respectful, not loud or showy, but it was clear that everyone appreciated what Keanu had said. The manager gave Keanu a slight bow. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," he said. "I will personally make sure this doesn't happen again." Keanu nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I trust you will," he said simply. Then he sat back down, and the dining room gradually returned to normal, though the memory of what had happened would linger in everyone's minds for a long time. Today, something happened, and I think we can all learn from it. The people eating dinner stayed quiet, thinking about what Keanu had said. The manager looked both nervous and impressed by how Keanu was handling things. Keanu turned to the manager and said, "I want to talk to the whole team after the restaurant closes. There are important things we need to discuss." The manager nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. I'm very sorry about everything." Keanu went back to his seat, and slowly the restaurant went back to normal, though people kept whispering about what had just happened. Later, when the restaurant was empty, all the workers stood together in the quiet room. Keanu stood in the middle, his calm but strong presence filling the space. He looked at everyone one by one, his eyes serious but kind. "We all make mistakes," he began in a clear voice. "But what really matters is what we do after those mistakes. Today we saw a problem, and it wasn't just about bad service. It was about quick judgments, unfair thoughts, and not understanding others. But this is not about blaming anyone. It's a chance to grow and do better." Keanu paused and looked at Alyssa, a worker sitting at the back with tears in her eyes. "Alyssa," he said softly but firmly, "I know what happened today was a mistake. Mistakes can be fixed, but only if you try and learn from them. What you do next will show who you really are." Then he turned to everyone else and continued, "In the world we live in, it's easy to judge people by what they look like, what they wear, how they act, or what they own. But think about this, what happens when we choose to be kind? When we look beyond someone's appearance and see them as a person just like us." Keanu walked a bit, putting his hands in his pockets, his voice becoming softer but thoughtful. "Everyone is dealing with struggles we can't see. Someone who looks out of place might be having the hardest day of their life. Someone dressed simply might have achieved amazing things. The kindness we show, even to someone who doesn't seem to deserve it, could change everything." The workers listened quietly, some looking moved, while others stared at the floor, thinking deeply. Finally, Alyssa lifted her head, wiping her tears. Her voice was soft and shaky. I didn't think about it that way before," she said sadly. "I was so focused on making the restaurant look perfect, I forgot what's really important. I forgot that every person matters no matter what they look like. I promise, Mr. Reeves, I'll do better." Keanu gave her a small, encouraging smile. "That promise isn't for me, Alyssa, it's for yourself. Real change comes from inside. If you need help, I'll be here." Alyssa nodded quickly, her face showing relief and determination. "Kindness," Keanu said to everyone, "isn't about big acts. It's about small choices we make every day. It's about treating everyone like they matter, because they do. That's what makes a place and a person truly great." The manager spoke up, his voice full of respect. "Mr. Reeves, your words are clear. We'll make sure Lumiere becomes the kind of place you're talking about. Thank you for reminding us." Keanu nodded, his face calm and kind, then left the restaurant. Outside, the streets of Beverly Hills sparkled under the city lights. He paused for a moment, looking back at Lumiere's entrance. He smiled softly, thinking about what had happened that night. It wasn't just about a restaurant or someone being treated unfairly. It was about creating places where people feel seen, heard, and valued. Keanu believed that even in hard moments, there's always a chance to inspire and make things better. As he walked down the bright streets, Keanu thought about his words and the lesson he hoped others would take away. If he could leave everyone with one idea, it would be this. In a world where you can be anything, choose to be kind. Real strength isn't in judging others, it's in accepting them. And remember, it's the small choices we make every day that shape the world and show who we are. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.